Imagine your own mind acting as, like, a hostile witness against you.
Oof. Yeah. That is a terrifying thought.
Right. Like, you know it's lying. You know it's totally distorting reality, basically feeding you a narrative built out of your deepest insecurities.
Yeah, but you can't just turn it off.
Exactly. Despite knowing that it's lying, you are completely trapped inside that narrative. And today, we are taking a deep dive into a piece of writing that hurls you directly into that exact psychological state.
And I gotta say, it is an incredibly intense piece of source material. I mean, it doesn't just ask for your attention, it demands it right from the very first syllable.
It really, really does. And before we get into it, I want to give you, the listener, a clear map of what we are actually walking into today.
Yeah, that's probably a good idea.
So, the text we're analyzing is raw. It's explicit, and it reads like this unfiltered, almost stream of consciousness diary entry, or like modern slam poetry.
Definitely has that frantic rhythm to it.
Right. And it touches intensely on themes of gender identity, bodily dysphoria, and substance use.
Hmm.
And because these are complex and, often politically charged topics, we want to be super clear up front.
Right. Our goal today isn't to take a stance or endorse any of the actions described in the text.
Exactly. We are here purely to impartially decode this raw psychological landscape the author has given us.
Which is a landscape entirely defined by, well, overwhelming friction. I mean, the protagonist is navigating this very specific urban environment while simultaneously battling a deeply internal crisis of self.
And my first reaction to this text, I have to be totally honest with you, was just complete alienation.
Really, just alienation.
Yeah. When I first read it, I thought it was just this messy wall of noise. I could not find the rhythm at all. I mean, it starts with this relentless volley of adjectives.
Oh, right, the opening line.
Yeah, it goes, dusty, danky, junky, funky, yummy, funny, fun, crazy-ass, shitty girl in this punk to pal town. I read that and I literally thought, what is even happening here?
Well, it's designed to be disorienting. From a literary standpoint, the author is employing this rapid, almost percussive phrasing. You can actually hear a chaotic beat behind it.
Yeah, it's almost overwhelming to read out loud.
Exactly. And psychologically, what's happening here is a direct translation of sensory overload onto the page. The text explicitly places the protagonist in the optimistic six, which is a reference to Toronto.
Oh, right, the six.
Yeah. And the author isn't just telling you the city is loud. They are forcing your brain to process this loud, chaotic string of words so you feel that exact same disorientation that she's feeling right there on the pavement.
Okay, wait, hold on, though. You're calling it an assault on her senses, but isn't that just what a major metropolitan city is?
Well, yes and no.
Because, I mean, Toronto is loud, it's gritty and overwhelming for pretty much anyone who walks through it.
Yeah.
So is the city actually functioning as an antagonist here? Or is her baseline for handling normal urban chaos just, completely shattered?
That is the crucial distinction right there. You are right. The city is just being the city. But her internal baseline is fractured, and that completely changes how her brain processes the environment.
Okay, how so?
So, to understand this, we have to look at how the brain actually filters information. In a neurotypical rested state, your brain has a sensory gating mechanism, which is primarily managed by the thalamus.
Thalamus, got it.
Yeah. And it basically acts like a bouncer at a club. It decides which sights, sounds, and smells are actually important enough to send to your conscious awareness and which ones it should just block out.
Oh, okay, so normally the bouncer would block out, like the siren 3 blocks
Yeah.
away, or the smell of the subway grate, just so you can focus on putting one foot in front of the other.
Precisely. But when someone is in a state of high psychological distress, that sensory gating mechanism starts to fail.
The bouncer just walks off the job.
Exactly. The bouncer quits, and suddenly every single stimulus, the dusty, the danky, the junky, it all floods directly into the amygdala.
And that's the brain's fear center.
Yes. And that triggers a massive release of cortisol. So the city isn't actively attacking her, but because her neurological filter is totally compromised, she is experiencing the environment as a literal physical threat.
Wow. That makes the irony of the setting so much sharper. I mean, the text calls Toronto the optimistic six,
Right.
a city that probably brands itself on progress and shining glass towers and opportunity. But because her internal filter is completely shot, she can't access any of that optimism. She is just entirely trapped in the grit.
Yeah, the optimism belongs to the skyline, not to the person wobbling on the pavement.
Yeah.
And the friction between the city's promise and her reality really forces us to ask, well, why is her baseline so shattered in the first place?
Right. If the bouncer has walked off the job, what caused the distress that made him quit. And the text forces us to zoom in right at this point.
It really does. It gets very intimate.
Yeah, we move from this wide, chaotic shot of the streets into a deep, painful vulnerability. The language shifts completely away from environmental noise to intense bodily insecurity.
It becomes claustrophobically intimate, honestly.
Absolutely. I'm looking at this specific section where she just repeats a single pronoun over and over. It reads, she can't be she because she was never born with natural she's or tits.
Yeah, that line is heavy.
It is. What is actually happening psychologically when a narrative loops on a single word like that? It feels almost obsessive.
Well, it is obsessive, and it points directly to the core crisis of the text, which is this profound gender identity struggle and bodily dysphoria.
Yeah.
When a narrative loops like that, it represents cognitive dissonance. The brain is trying to reconcile two totally conflicting realities.
Like her internal versus external reality.
Exactly. On one side, she has her internal understanding of her gender, who she knows she is. But on the other side, she has a physical body that lacks the biological markers society demands, and an external world that aggressively denies her that identity.
So the repetition of she isn't just a stylistic choice from the author. It's the sound of a brain grinding its gears, desperately trying to force the external reality to match the internal truth.
Yes, beautifully put. It is a demand for recognition. And the psychological weight of that denial is just staggering.
I can only imagine.
Because the brain actually processes profound social rejection and identity invalidation, using the exact same neural pathways that it uses to process physical pain.
Wait, really? The same pathways?
Yeah. When society tells you that you cannot exist as you are, that you are gatekept from your own identity, it creates a constant, exhausting cognitive load. It literally hurts.
Which explains the brutal frustration that immediately follows that section. The text hits us with this blunt assessment. Sex she wants. Sex she doesn't get. Shithole and fuckhole she isn't the best.
Notice how the desire for intimacy is framed there? Sex she wants. This isn't really just about physical gratification.
What is it about then?
It's a desperate bid for external validation. Think about it when your own body feels like a site of rejection and society refuses to validate your identity, you seek out intimacy as a way to prove you are desirable, to prove that you are real and that you belong.
Right. But because she feels fundamentally flawed, she literally calls herself fucked whole. She anticipates rejection before it even happens.
And that anticipation of rejection keeps the nervous system locked in a state of hypervigilance. So she's walking through the optimistic six, carrying the weight of a body she feels alienated from, seeking validation she firmly believes she will never get.
Okay, when you lay it out like that, the sensory overload from the failing thalamus, the neurological pain of identity rejection, this exhausting cognitive loop, it makes total sense why the text suddenly violently pivots.
Oh, the pivot is jarring.
Yeah, because if your reality is that painful, you look for a circuit breaker.
You have to alter the consciousness because the baseline consciousness is totally unsustainable.
And the text does this with literally zero warning. The vulnerability we were just talking about is immediately interrupted by a completely different tone. He goes, clobbing and klingling, fast the cunt, baby you sick, pass me the blunt.
And then the shift happens.
Right, and then immediately, in all caps, it screams, shit, I'm high, bullshit high. May I ask why?
This transition is brilliant. It really is, because it highlights a complete structural collapse in the narrative perspective.
How do you mean?
Well, think about it. Up until the exact moment she gets high, the entire text has been written in the third person. She is wobbling. She can't be she. Sex she wants.
Oh, wait, I totally missed that on the first read. She was talking about herself in the third person that whole time. Why?
It is a classic manifestation of disassociation.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, when the brain is overwhelmed by emotional or physical pain, particularly in cases of severe bodily dysphoria, the amygdala basically trips that circuit breaker we talked about earlier. It disconnects the experiencing self from the observing self to protect the psyche.
It's a way of saying, this pain isn't happening to me, it's happening to her.
Exactly. She was observing her own misery from a safe distance.
Okay, so she created a psychological buffer. But the moment the THC hits her system, shitty IH, that buffer is entirely obliterated. The text switches instantly to the first person. I'm high. May I ask why?
The distance is gone.
It's like a movie where the camera is doing this smooth, wide documentary-style shot of a crowded room, and then suddenly, without any warning, it switches to a shaky, dizzying, claustrophobic first-person camera right behind the protagonist's own eyes.
That is the perfect analogy. The disassociation collapses entirely. She is slammed back into her own body, and she is terrified.
But why does the high bring her back in so violently? I mean, people usually smoke to numb out, right? Get further away from the pain. Why did it have the exact opposite effect here?
Because introducing a psychoactive substance like THC to a highly dysregulated nervous system is basically like throwing gasoline on a fire.
Okay, that sounds bad.
It is. THC interacts with the brain's endocannabinoid system, which helps regulate anxiety and fear responses. In a relaxed brain, sure, it might produce euphoria. But in a brain that is already flooded with cortisol, already hypervigilant about rejection and identity, the substance amplifies the paranoia. The amygdala just goes into overdrive.
Which we see immediately in the text, because the social space around her instantly turns hostile. The voices start bleeding right into the narrative. She hears, "Hey, no, shit ass might pass out you shitloads. Better get to the task of attempting to ask this ass to walk away."
She is attempting to navigate this social environment, right? Attempting to ask someone to walk away, attempting to just say goodbye, but her attempts are clumsy because her brain is misfiring.
Yeah, the text says, "You talk so much sounds like you toxic so much. You attempting to say goodbye. But goodbye you won't. You just tipped your boats."
You just tipped your boats.
Meaning any attempt she makes to fix the awkwardness just completely capsizes the situation. It's that horrible universal feeling of being overly aware of yourself at a party, trying to act normal, and somehow making it 10 times worse.
Oh, absolutely. And then the paranoia fully takes over. She looks at the people around her and describes them as fucklords and scavengers. All hands on me, the moat.
The moat imagery is fascinating to me. Historically, a moat is a defensive boundary, right? It surrounds the castle to keep the threats out. But she says the scavengers have all hands on me, the moat. They've breached the perimeter. Her defenses are completely overrun.
They are. And we really have to ask here, are these people actually hostile scavengers? Are they actively attacking her? Or is this just the paranoia of the high, amplifying her pre-existing belief that she's fundamentally flawed and worthy of rejection?
Ah, okay, so the people might literally just be standing there.
Yeah.
But because her internal filter is now completely distorted by both the dysphoria and the drugs, she perceives them as predators.
Exactly.
The objective reality of the optimistic six hasn't changed at all, but her subjective lens is deeply corrupted.
Yes. And this sets the stage for the final, devastating realization of the piece. All of this external noise, the sensory assault of the city, the biological reality of her body, the social toxicity of the party, it all pulls her under.
The text describes it so viscerally. It says, wanging, tangling, fucking around. Just wait till she's fucked head, and wait till she's only just fucking drowned in her own ugly, useless, wimpy sounds of why, and oh God, oh my.
Drowned in her own sounds. Think about that, the sensory overload we discussed at the very beginning. The loud city.
Yeah.
It turns out the loudest, most overwhelming noise wasn't Toronto at all. It was her own internal rumination.
Wow. But out of all that rumination, out of the drugs and the noise, she arrives at this moment of sudden, absolute self-awareness. The final sentence of this text is an absolute gut punch.
It really is.
She says, everything is horrible, my everything is fucked, because that's just what my mind sees, whether I am that or not.
It is an incredible psychological unmasking. I mean, for the entire narrative, she has been pointing outward. She blamed the gritty, dusty city. She blamed her lack of natural biology. She blamed the fucklords and the scavengers.
Right.
But in this final sentence, she realizes the ultimate prison isn't Toronto, and it isn't the party. The ultimate prison is her own cognitive distortion.
Let's break down that term, cognitive distortion, because it sounds very clinical. But what she is actually describing is deeply terrifying. How does the brain actually reach a point where it convinces itself everything is horrible, whether I am that or not?
Okay, think of the brain's perception system like a massive audio mixing board in a recording studio.
Okay, mixing board.
Yeah. In a healthy state, your prefrontal cortex, which is the logical reasoning part of your brain, operates the sliders. It balances the levels. So if a minor embarrassment happens, it pushes the threat slider down and the logic slider up.
Makes sense.
But under extreme chronic distress, the limbic system, the emotional reactive part of the brain, completely hijacks the board.
Oh, so it pushes the threat slider to the absolute maximum.
Exactly. The threat and horror sliders are maxed out, and the logic slider is entirely muted. And the tragedy of cognitive distortion, and what makes this final line so profound, is that she is entirely aware that her mind is doing this.
Right. She says, whether I am that or not.
Yes. She knows that objectively, the universe might not be entirely horrible.
She can literally see the mixing board. She is staring right at it, watching the sliders get hijacked. But her prefrontal cortex is completely locked out. She can't reach out and push the sliders back down.
That is the exact mechanism of depression and severe anxiety. The self-awareness doesn't act as a cure here, it acts as a cage.
That is so dark.
It is. It is one thing to believe a delusion because you just don't know any better. It is a profoundly darker experience to know your brain is manufacturing a hellish reality, to recognize the distortion, and to still be completely powerless to change how it feels.
Because it removes all the scapegoats. You can't just blame the city anymore. You have to face the architect of your own misery and realize the architect is your own neurological wiring in that moment.
Precisely.
That realization that her mind is the filter exclusively letting in horror is what makes this text so universally impactful.
Because whether or not you have ever dealt with bodily dysphoria or found yourself overly intoxicated at a chaotic party in Toronto, every single human being possesses a brain capable of this exact same hijacking.
That's a sobering thought.
It is. The default mode network in our brains, the part responsible for daydreaming and self-reflection, can very easily slip into a state of negative rumination.
It takes us right back to our very first observation about the city, doesn't it? The city hasn't changed. The people around her haven't changed. But her mind has taken neutral data and weaponized it against her.
And recognizing that the weaponization is happening, seeing the mixing board for what it is the painful, necessary first step toward regaining control. Even if she can't move the sliders yet, naming the distortion is how you begin to dismantle it.
Man, let's pull all of this together because the journey we just took alongside this protagonist is staggering.
It's a lot to process.
We started on the rhythmic, overwhelming streets of the optimistic six, analyzing how a compromised internal filter turns a loud city into a literal neurological assault. Then we zoomed in to explore the exhausting cognitive dissonance of a body and an identity at war with each other, and that desperate seeking of validation.
Yeah, and then we watched the psychological buffer of disassociation violently collapse under the influence of THC, plunging her into a paranoid, hostile reality where totally neutral social interactions mutated into scavengers at the moat.
And finally, we crashed into that devastating moment of clarity. The realization that the ultimate antagonist wasn't the city, the body, or the people. It was the mind's terrifying ability to distort reality. Everything is horrible because that's just what my mind sees.
It is a stark reminder of the sheer power of human perception. Our minds construct our reality entirely from the inside out.
It really is. And it leaves me with this one final thought for you to carry with you as you step back into your own world today.
Right.
We've just spent a lot of time analyzing how a mind, under intense stress and distortion, possesses this terrifying power to convince us that everything is horrible, that we are fundamentally flawed even when we know logically that it might not be true.
Right.
So if your brain is wired with that much imaginative power to independently construct your own personal hell, what would it take to hack that exact same mechanism?
Oh, that's a great question.
If the mixing board can be hijacked by fear, what practices, what environments, or what self-compassion would it take to hijack it back? What would it take to use that massive power of perception to unconditionally convince yourself that you are safe, that you belong, and that you are enough?